Hello and welcome to AgriFocus, the podcast from Agriland that looks in depth at some of the topical issues of the day. I'm Stella Meehan, and later in this episode I'll be joined by technical dairy journalist with Agriland Hugh Harney and deputy news editor Francess McDonnell to chat about the feeling around March rings lately and tariffs. But let's start by talking about beef price. There isn't a beef farmer in the country who is probably not wondering what way the trade will go in the coming weeks and months. What has been dubbed a beef boom in the past couple of months has seen beef price reach highs of almost €8 a kilo in some instances. There's some talk of the trade easing, but this wasn't really displayed on price boards this week. This week's factory quotes for beef cattle saw prices lift again, with base price offerings having increased by up to 30 cents a kilo since Monday of last week in some cases. And some outlets held their base price offerings this week for prime cattle at the same level as last week, but this leaves them as much as 30 cents a kilo behind other outlets on base price for prime cattle for this week. So while there is more talk from procurement staff of prices steadying this week, this talk has yet to materialise as Agriland analysis shows that prices have continued to rise. The level of competition between factories has also increased significantly in recent weeks, with strong flat price deals and free haulage being tabled in cases to tempt farmer suppliers to change their usual go-to factory, as they might say. Procurement staff at some factories are being instructed to return to grid pricing where possible and move away from flat price offers to farmers. But with some outlets still offering flat price deals, the move is proving challenging to these factories. Some outlets have also reduced the number of days they are killing this week. So just to give you some idea of the price this week, some of the outlets that were opening negotiations for steers or bullocks and heifers last week at €7.50 and €7.60 a kilo on the grid respectively, they started off this week at €7.80 and €7.90 a kilo on the grid for steers and heifers. So that's a rise of 30 cents per kilo. Now, Agriland has been out and about chatting to you to get your opinions on how the farming sector in general is faring at the moment. So let's hear from the first of those interviews with farmers at Carnaross Mart.
The general mood at the moment is good. It was quite an easy winter, considering that we had two very difficult years on weather. The spring has come early, even though the grass growth is poor. Land is very, very dry. Most of the stock are out. They're thriving early. They can early thrive is very important. Prices are good. Cattle prices are record. Sheep are very good. Dairy is okay. So in general, I'd say that the mood of farmers is very positive looking forward for 2025. I can't see much investment going on. The costs of investing in farms has just gone through the roof. TAMS grants are held up. There's planning permission problems. Getting contractors or builders to do the work is a problem, so I can see very little investment in 2025. It's just the cost of doing business on a farm, and overall general running costs of a farm have just exploded the last 2 years. And I know prices are good now, but every bit of that price is needed to cover rising costs. The main issues at the moment is TB is a huge issue all over the country. There's herds going down with one or two animals and bigger breakdowns that never had TB. The wildlife program is not working. Badgers are out of control. Also, the other big, fear at the moment is, will blue tongue arrive to Ireland? If blue tongue is rampant in Europe, it's the southwest of England at the minute. When temperatures rise, there's a very good chance it's going to come to Ireland. And when it comes to Ireland, the export trade will be closed down temporarily.
It's not just beef price that is strong at the moment. Milk price too has been holding its own now for quite a while. The latest milk price tracker from Agriland and the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, the ICMSA, shows that there was no drastic changes in milk price for the month of February. Of course, we'll have the price for the month of March out shortly. But in February, most co-ops maintained the same milk price from January, many of which offered in around the 50 cent per litre or more as a base price. I'm joined now by Hugh Harney, our dairy writer. Hugh, we'll go, I suppose, to the feeling from the agricultural sector as a whole in the moment, from out and about on the marterings. But in terms of milk price, what do you think is the feeling towards the current milk prices among dairy farmers at the minute?
Yeah, Stella, I think there's really nothing to complain about at the minute. As you said, milk price has held for February supplies. And look, so the majority of co-ops are kind of at that 50 cent a litre base price, with a few still lagging behind. But yeah, in general, I think, it's positive. I think only 2 co-ops decreased price this month. So look, we'll be hoping that it'll stay around the same for March supplies. But in general, at the minute, it's looking positive. And look, also there's a lot of at the minute there's the early calving bonuses. There's seasonality bonuses. So, from that base price, there is actually, there's 5 cent bonuses there, there's 6 cent bonuses there. So, like, in general, it's good. And look, it's the West Cork co-ops that are still leading the way. And, the rest are kind of lagging behind, but it's tight enough there at the top, so it is, Stella.
Yeah, so it's a stable milk price, I suppose, at the minute, at a time when farmers needed a bit of stability because they're up to their tonsils, I suppose, in terms of the workload. Like, we're just there at calving, we're looking at breeding, fertiliser. There's a lot going on dairy farms at the minute, Hugh.
Yeah, and look, Stella, the mood is very good among farmers at the minute. As we just said, like, milk price is good, but like, in terms of grass growth, it was a very poor start of the year, and I suppose kind of looking forward now, that bit of warmth in the ground. I think soil temperatures around 8 to 10 degrees Celsius. So, growth is looking better. We're kind of predicting now that it'll be around 40 to 45 kgs of dry matter a hectare a day. So it's looking positive. And like, look, that's after a slow start. So it's kind of getting towards kind of the levels that it should be at. And look, no one can complain about conditions. Like, conditions have been fantastic, even for the majority of the spring, and especially March. So, like, look, it's allowing farmers to kind of maximise that dry matter intake, which is crucial coming up to breeding, Stella. Maximise that dry matter intake, get energy levels up. And, then look, there's a good focus now on getting silage ground fertilised. And farmers, in general, like, I suppose in February, there was a good opportunity for getting out slurry. And I suppose a lot of farmers were emptying tanks. And look, I suppose if you did get out 3,000 gallons to the acre of, good quality slurry, which is about 6% dry matter, you probably made up about 20 to 23 units of your nitrogen. And then you're probably okay in terms of PK, phosphorus and potassium. But yeah, so look, I suppose if you're still to get out fertilizer, take into account that slurry that you've spread. And I suppose you want to be kind of getting out 80 units of nitrogen, 16 units of phosphorus, 100 units of potassium, and about 16 units of sulfur. And look, bear in mind that 3,000 gallons to the acre could have made up the majority of that P and K and 20 to 23 units of that N. So look, and that's for indexes of 3 in P and K. So look, if you're in index 1 or 2, you probably could be going out with that bit more of P and K. So it's just every farm is different, and you'll just have to maybe talk to your advisor and just see what you have to do there. And look, like, we're talking about cows out of grass, but like, also, calves are out of grass now, which is a real positive. And I suppose, like, the one thing we have to be careful of when letting calves out to grass, and farmers can be eager on getting calves out to grass, and that's good, but I'd suggest maybe just hold off on a couple of calves that are very young, because you have to wait until their rumen is fully developed, because you don't want kind of running into summer scour syndrome problems. And like, look, if that is the case, I'd advise for the first month anyway at turnout, kind of keep an eye on the calves, and like maybe keep a bit of straw and hay in front of them, and maybe even strip graze, because calves are selective grazers, and they'll just select the most lush grass. So
yeah, that's a good idea. And I've seen a lot of calves out actually in fields at the moment, but they'd be that bit more grown, Hugh, as you said. Like, I mean, they're a bit stronger, a bit more room and development there. So it's the more real younger ones, just give them the time to develop so that they can, I suppose, digest it when they actually go out grazing, And I just want to go back to your point there as well on breeding. I mean, breeding season, again, another very busy season. Is there ever not a busy season for a dairy farmer, as man says? But the breeding season's an awful busy season as well at the moment. And year on year, Hugh, as time goes on, more and more farmers, are really putting a lot of thought, a lot of consideration into how they breed nowadays, aren't they? Not that they didn't before, but there's certainly way more of an emphasis on it now.
Yeah, there certainly is, Stella. And look, we're at that kind of pre-breeding time of the year now, where farmers are kind of focusing on, getting tail paint on cows and, kind of monitoring their estrus cycle and seeing if they're behaving the way they should be, and kind of trying to identify those non-bullers in the herd, which is also very important. But look, I was, with breeding only around the corner, like farmers have the catalogues out and, they're intensively selecting what they want and what they want to improve in their herd. And like I was speaking to a few of the AI companies there last week, and what I found interesting was a lot of them were saying that there's a huge emphasis on milk this year, which is very interesting because, I suppose in years past, there has been a huge emphasis on, milk solids. And like, no, there still is a huge emphasis on milk solids, don't get me wrong. But I suppose farmers have been kind of selecting kind of maybe negative in milk and positive in milk percentage, kind of going for that 0.3 fat and 0.2 protein. But what we've seen now is that, farmers are kind of looking for that nearly 200 kgs of milk as well. And I'm not necessarily sure where this is coming from, but I say, with the poor weather and the kind of grass growth in the last couple of years, maybe farmers weren't really, they were failing to produce that kgs of milk solids because, like farmers can forget or whatever, but like, in order to achieve those kgs of milk solids, Stella, like you do need kgs of milk, and it's as simple as that. And look, another thing I found interesting, well, like, a lot of the AI companies were saying that there's a heavy focus this year on health traits, which is very interesting because I suppose, with TB cases rampant around the country and, TB black spots, there is a huge emphasis on that and kind of getting those TB resistant bulls into the herd. And then look, dairy beef is up and sex semen is up and, conventional seems to be still holding its own. So yeah, interesting trends across the board, Stella.
Absolutely. And just apart from the milk price, which we talked about earlier, Hugh, you've been at martyrs all over the country, length and breadth of the country, including farm walks and talks and everything recently. And what do you sense is the general feeling on the ground, I suppose, in terms of farm futures, whatever it may be, market prices, milk price, trade, whatever the case may be? Like what is the sentiment from farmers?
Yeah, well, look, it's all positive for the short term at the minute, Stella. And look, you kind of touched on factory quotes, but like, from a beef point of view, bullocks and heifers are making €7.80 to €7.90 a kilo. There's a hot commodity in Angus heifers and steers making up to €8.40 a kilo. U-grade cows, €7.60 to €7.70 a kilo. And look, O-grade, €7.30 to €7.40. And look, O&P are €7.690 a kilo. And like, what I find interesting of that, Stella, is that like your P-grade cows are still making great money. And what I see around marts and talking to farmers, I've seen, there's a huge emphasis on nearly replacing poor performing cows so those poor performing cows you can take straight out of the parlour, get a good price in the factory and replace them for a young cow or a young heifer, only freshly calved in milk, for little money extra. In football in terms, it's like Liverpool, selling Darwin Núñez in replace of Alexander Isak, from Newcastle for only small money. So like, you're getting a better player for little to no money, So like, it's interesting from that point of view. And look, being around the dairy sales and dispersal sales, that is what's happening. And it's like, I suppose with the good weather, cows are out of grass and milk price is good. It is more enticing to do so and really kind of pump that milk production. And look, there's kind of no difference. We were all kind of shocked at the start of the year with calf prices. And, they're still holding. In fact, actually, there was a slight increase last week in calf prices. So very positive from that point of view. And look, the biggest surprise this year from a dairy point of view is that the Frisian bull calf was making so much money. And like, I actually, when I was talking to those AI companies, they were kind of nervous of that because they were kind of, nervous that farmers would kind of go too much of an increase on conventional dairy AI and kind of not look at the dairy beef. But what they actually have found is that it's not the case. That farmers are going into these marts and seeing the difference of your Herefords and your Angus calves, and the difference they're making even towards your Frisian calf. And then, take your Belgian Blues, your Charlies. Belgian Blues in particular are making serious money this spring. So, like, compare them to your Frisian calf, they're worlds apart. So, it is very positive on the ground, Stella.
Fantastic. And if you want to see a humorous video of a difference between an Angus and a Frisian calf, you can go onto our social media pages, the Agriland social media pages, where we have a lovely demonstration of a calf from both breeds there. But thanks for that, Hugh. We might just take a listen actually to some more farmer opinions from out and about at Carna Rossmart over the past week.
The cattle trade is very good at the moment. Store cattle are a great trade. Angus, good Angus cattle, 500 kilos, 480 kilos, making 2,000 to 1. And if you have heavier into the 500, 560, 70 kilos, you'll get 2.5 to 2.6 for cattle. They're a very good trade. I see Frisian cull cows in there today. They're stripper cows are very good trade. They're 1,1700 for Frisian store cows, and good beef cows in there. Heavy 780 kilo beef cow would make 3.2, 3.3. It's very good money. Cattle are serious trade. They're going up in the factory every week, and the outlook looks good for cattle at the moment. You're in different league altogether than last year on the price of cattle. I sold cattle this year, store cattle this year, around 2,000. Last year, the same cattle, maybe 1,500. Sheep trade, hoggets are a great trade at the moment. And the spring lamb are, I don't know, over €9. The hoggets are 8.50. You get a lot more weight in the hoggets. So they're a great trade for farmers at the moment compared to the spring lamb. And you get a heavier weight in the factory for the hogget.
Most farmers seem to be positive about certainly beef price at the moment, but there was some concern recently that beef would become less popular, certainly in the hospitality sector, as it became more expensive to purchase. At the recent Good Food Ireland conference, panellists discussed the beginning of conversations now happening in top restaurants about whether to remove the likes of fillet steak, for example, from the menu entirely. A panel at that conference included the Irish Farmers Association President, Francie Gorman, Una Fitzgibbon, who is the Director of Marketing with Borbia, Peter Ward, who owns Country Choice Nina, and Executive Chef at the Cake Club in County Kildare, Gary O'Hanlon. During the conversation, panellist Peter Ward said he was recently in the UK where he saw a fillet of steak priced at £86 sterling per kilo in a butcher shop. And chef Gary O'Hanlon admitted that for the first time, he has now had the conversation about removing beef from the menu at the Cake Club, that's where he works, and said, quote, "At the end of the day, the customer is king and people won't pay it." In Agriland, we've been speaking to beef farmers who have contracts with supermarkets, and reportedly some supermarkets are considering reducing the shelf space for beef because of the increase in cost, and they're going to fill that vacancy on the shelf with the likes of chicken and maybe other poultry. I think it's acknowledged that people want to see farmers get a decent price for their hard work in providing us with food, but whether that sentiment actually carries all the way to their wallets if they're expected to pay more for the likes of a steak, for example, well, that remains to be seen. So let's hear from some more farmers out and about.
Any man that held on to the cattle for the last maybe 6-7 months there and didn't sell anything and is coming out on to more or less coming out now to grass. Any man that's grazing for the summer or anything, he is going to be paying well for cattle at the minute. So he is. That's my opinion on it. So it is. I can't see the market changing for the foreseeable anyway. And any man that's willing to stick with it It's going to pay off, so it is.
Now, we cannot talk about the state of farming at the moment without talking about the trade winds that are headed our way. US President Donald Trump has imposed a tariff of 20% on goods imported to the US from the EU and a 10% tariff on goods into the US from the UK, which in and of itself causes major regulatory and logistical issues both north and south of the border with Northern Ireland. IBEC went so far as to indicate recently that the milk pool, north and south of the border, is going to be caught in the crosshairs of the tariff controversy, as some companies obviously operate in both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And it's causing something of concern for farmers on the ground as well. Let's have a listen.
Yeah, well, I don't think farmers should be making that much investments now. They have to be careful now in their movements, I think, and have to wait to see what the end of the year is. Just the uncertainty that's there, like of the tariffs and all that everything. Who knows what Trump is going to bring on?
Let me bring in Agriland's Francess McDonnell there after listening to those farmers speaking to Agriland at Carnaross Mart. There are so many facets, Francis, to the impacts of US tariffs on Irish exports. The impact on dairy, the impact on drinks such as Irish whiskey, the impact then of reciprocal tariffs on goods coming into the EU from the US. So I think it's safe to say, as an agri-food exporting nation, we are justified in being concerned at the moment.
Very concerned, because the problem is we have no clear line of sight about what President Donald Trump is going to do. He's kind of unfilled these tariffs. We've seen stock markets tumble throughout the world, and we've seen the impact already on Irish exporters who are generally nervous. And as we speak, Stella, the Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Martin Hayden, is in the US this week, where he will hold a number of meetings in Washington on Capitol Hill. And during those meetings, one of them will be with the US Secretary for Agriculture, Brooke Rollins. Now, we know that one of the key messages that Minister Hayden plans to deliver during his US visit is that tariffs are not a one-way street. Last year, Ireland exported almost €2 billion worth of agri-food produce to the US. And as Minister Hayden has repeatedly said in recent days, it's a key market for Irish producers, and barriers, as he has stressed, any barrier at all to trade does not only hurt Irish companies, but it's also going to hurt US consumers and companies as well. Because, as we know, US consumers do like Irish products. And let's just talk about two of the most popular ones, butter and whiskey. Mm-hmm. Now, we're hearing, and it's unconfirmed as yet, that whiskey, wine and dairy products could potentially be off the list of the European Commission's proposed list of retaliatory tariffs. That's not confirmed yet. But if we look at the facts and figures, overall, 95% of Irish whiskey produced on this island is exported, and 45% of that goes straight to the US. So it's no surprise then that the Irish Whisky Association has said that any new tariffs could bring devastating impacts to companies that export to the US. But there's also the fact that an estimated €1 billion of Irish grass-fed product went into the United States last year. And one, of course, the most popular of that is the Kerrygold brand. Everybody talks about how the Americans love the Kerrygold brand, not least the Kardashians, of course, and we know how popular they are with consumers.
Well, it's the second most popular butter brand in the United States at the moment. I don't know what's wrong with those people that voted not as the first, but
yeah, and that's huge when you look at the American market. Absolutely massive. And we've been chatting to Arnua, which owns the Kerrygold brand, and it has said, it's quite upbeat. It said it remains hopeful that a negotiated solution can be reached between the US and the EU. But at the moment, what we know at this time is that an initial 10% baseline tariff is already in place on all goods coming from the EU. That includes Ireland. But President Trump has said that perhaps he intends to reduce, further tariffs, including, up to 200% tariff on all European alcohol imports. And he's definitely indicated that a 20% tariff on the EU as a whole is a possibility. So for exporters like Arnua and for the Kerrygold brand, very difficult days ahead.
Absolutely. It's a very difficult time because with economic politics, and that is what this is, it's I'll show my hand, you show yours. It's honestly a game of poker, a game of chicken, whatever you want to call it. I don't think Donald Trump is an idiot. I don't think he's not a smart man. He has to realise that tariffs will absolutely impact the US population as well. They're going to have to pay more. He wants to make America wealthy again, but at the same time, these tariffs are really going to impact on his own voters. We might as well call them that because, they voted for him, the majority. So they do impact everyone. Similarly, if the EU is to bring in reciprocal tariffs, they are going to impact also on EU citizens who are, and particularly small businesses. Some businesses have to get product from the US as part of their supply chain. So it's going to impact on them. And while we're waiting to see what the EU will do, the soundings have already been put out by the US president in terms of what he plans to do if China continues, to wage its trade war against it. It's almost calling people's bluff at this stage. Now, it's not a bluff to a certain extent in Donald Trump's case, because he does follow through. He does implement these tariffs. But in the crosshairs are the small businesses who are, trying to do their business plans. I'm sure at every financial year they try to do their plan for the following year, and they don't know if they're going to be able to export. In the short term, and this is what IBEC had said last week as well, in the short term, the viability of some businesses is very concerning, because in the long term, perhaps this will get resolved. And the trade war won't continue. But in the short term, it is very difficult for the likes of distillers that export, for the likes of, Ornua obviously is a big company, but it would still be hit. It has massive exports to the US and so on. So it'll be extremely important and timely for Minister Hayden to get that message across to various lobby groups while he's in Washington, while he's in Kentucky, while he's in Chicago this week.
Yeah, and I think he's very mindful of the fact that Ireland is not an isolated economy. We're part of the European Union. We have to fall in with the bloc. We have to make sure that they understand the impact that has on Irish farmers, because the Irish Cooperative Organisation Society, ICOS, said that the US is an extremely important market for Irish dairy farmers, and they actually put the value of that market at around 830 million in 2024. And obviously it's kind of emphasised the fact that high value butter and cheese exports are the primary drivers there, but it's all interconnected. So if we took that export figure out of the general economy in Ireland, the impact that has right across agri-society is huge.
Absolutely huge, yeah. And we are an exporting nation. 90% of our produce is exported. We don't need that much food in this country, but we do provide food security for the rest of the world as a result. So there's nobody, I think, at the moment that cannot sit on its laurels in terms of what this will mean. It's difficult for our processors, to try and navigate that sort of economic environment at the moment. The likes of maybe Lakeland or other processors that take milk from milk suppliers both south and north of the border. I mean, you have rules of origin issues there as well. It's very, very tricky. And at this point, we're sitting here doing an episode of AgriFocus, and we could sit here in a week's time. And
it'll have changed, because we know that these meetings are taking place in Europe at the moment. And also, we had our Taoiseach yesterday. Simon Harris took part in an extraordinary meeting of the EU trade ministers in Luxembourg. And his key message was that the EU needs to work together towards a negotiated solution. So we can't all be fighting our patch. And I know that, if we listen to the economists and Irish business leaders, they're basically saying, let's de-escalate the situation. We cannot afford as Ireland to get into a trade war with the US. We just can't. We can't take that on board. We're far too small to take that on board. So when Taoiseach Simon Harris is saying, let's look for a negotiation, we don't know very much about what President Trump is planning at the moment, but we do know that he likes a deal. So I think, what we want to see is Europe saying, yes, okay, we're not very happy about this. We're very disappointed. We've had an excellent business trading relationship down the years, but we're in a completely different era now. Nobody can predict what President Trump is going to do next, and the impact that has on markets, on domestic markets and global markets, is really unfathomable at the moment.
Absolutely. We'll have to see where it goes. Certainly over the next week to 14 days, a lot more will transpire, and particularly in terms of the reciprocal response, I suppose, to US President Donald Trump's threats of various tariffs, particularly about increasing them. But unfortunately, that's all we have time for on today's episode of AgriFocus. Please do rate and review this podcast to help us spread the word, and share the podcast with anyone you think might like to listen. Until next time, goodbye and take care.